Namaskaram and welcome to Indica Yoga to Sri Ganesh Mohan ji. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Thank you. Namaskaram from me too. Thank you.
And
My pleasure to be here.
he's a teacher and speaker for Indica's Mysore Yoga Utsava happening in December 2024 at Mysuru. Thank you so much.
My pleasure to be at the conference. I could not be there at the Mysuru Yoga Utsava last year. My schedule did not permit it. So this year, when Vinay Chandraji invited me, I said, sure, there was enough time in advance to plan my schedule around it, and I'm very happy to be there. So what shall we talk about today?
Yeah, the theme of the conference itself is Ananda. So, what are your thoughts? I mean, when we talk, your specialization has been therapy. So, when we talk about therapy in a very broad sense, we are talking about the, trying to remove whatever issues or unhappiness both in the body and the mind. So, the other end of the spectrum is a very positive aspect of Ananda. So, how do we draw, how do we connect between the two?
I think you have partly addressed the question in the way that you have phrased it yourself very nicely. But the human experience exists on a spectrum. On one hand, on one side, we can have dukkha, the suffering that accompanies any disease, but it does not have to be a physical disease. There is also suffering that comes from mental disease, or in general, what we might call life itself. At the other end is the feeling of joy, of happiness. See, we use this word therapy in a limited sense nowadays because of the way we look at the approach to treatment being only when the problem is significant enough to address it. That's often how the medical system tends to take people in. We take them in after they become patients, which means that there is a significant degree of suffering that is coming to their attention. Of course, we should be looking at what led to that situation in the first place if we want to take the holistic view. Problems don't arise suddenly unless it's like an accident or an acute condition or an infection. Most chronic health problems arise gradually over time. There are lifestyle factors behind it. My parents' teacher, Sri Krishnamacharya, used to point out that yoga can be used for shiksha, chikitsa, and upasana. That is, you can do yoga just for more health maintenance. You do more asana, more pranayama, move more, breathe more deeply, deepen your meditation practice, and so on. That is the shiksha. Shiksha literally meaning learning or teaching. You're just learning more yoga. Another reason people approach it is chikitsa, which is that you have suffering of some sort and you wish to be relieved of it. That is what we generally term as therapy. And a third reason is the adhyatmika reason. You want to go deeper within yourself, spiritual transformation. This deep-seated question that is there right from the Upanishadic times. What is the true nature of myself and what is the underlying nature of reality? Whether you call that Atma or Purusha, Brahman, whatever. Now, these three are not fundamentally separate from each other. If you look at the presentation of yoga, the goal of yoga is to be free of dukkha, to be free of suffering. This is the stated goal of yoga. If you see the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, He says in the second chapter, the 16th sutra, that the goal of yoga is heyam dukkha managatam. You want to be free of dukkha, suffering that comes to you in future. This is not the goal of yoga alone. No? This is the goal of yoga, of Sankhya, of Buddhism, of Vedanta. Everybody has this fundamental goal in the ancient Indian darshanas. We want to be free of dukkha, suffering completely and permanently. It is from that larger lens that you find these offshoots of the various practices, whether it be asana, pranayama, or varieties of meditation practice, or different lifestyle changes to support that. And whether it is about doing more practice or therapy or personal transformation, as Sri Krishnamacharya said, it is all under the same umbrella. So what we do as therapy is not intrinsically different in yoga from what we would be doing with someone who is well. We would still be doing movement, breathing, changes in the lifestyle, changes in nutrition, working with the mind, and so on. I sometimes tell people this: if you build these skills before you have chronic health problems, you call it prevention. If you build the skills in a more targeted way after you have these health problems, you're calling it therapy. So it is good to consider this existence as being on a spectrum. At one end, there are more imbalances in body and mind, then we experience that as more suffering, disease. At the other end, things are more in balance and we experience that as well-being. So it is not so much that when I say we are working on therapy, it is that we are separating ourselves from the rest of the yoga space. It is just being more specific, that's all. When someone comes with specific imbalances, you say, what is their problem? If they have back pain, okay, you're going to work more on exercise, on movement, but that doesn't mean that we don't work with psychology or don't work with breathing. You have to do all of those things anyway. And if they don't have back pain, they're just working on asanas, on strengthening, still many of the same principles apply. How to actually move effectively, you have to know that anyway, because that will help prevent a lot of problems in future if you gain those skills beforehand, as I was saying a little earlier. So the path and application of yoga actually spans all of these areas, from personal transformation to fitness to therapy, and it is a unified model that we use. We don't really try and separate out the therapy only. The therapy inevitably follows as being a more specific component of working with a more holistic approach.
So in another context, like music therapy, for instance, doctor, we didn't, some musicians say that our music, the aim of our music was finally, like you said, the adhyatmic purpose, which is self-realization or union with the divine. But now we are taking each raga and saying, this particular raga helps for this. If you listen to this raga, it will help that ill. So it's being retrofitted into the raga system. So is that also happening in yoga? And what are we losing if, as a medical doctor, if we try and fit an issue to a particular asana, like you have physiotherapy, what do we lose, and but also how is it useful as a tool?
I am not so sure that you can make these approaches to health problems so specific, that you can, even in the field of music, that you can say this raga is going to specifically help with a certain health condition. In generally, sounds shift mood and they shift energy. This is absolutely true, which is why when you have different ragas, you have morning ragas, evening ragas, it shifts your emotional state. And it can also shift the energy state. There is no doubt about that. The sound is vibration, it has an effect on body and mind. But how specific can you be is an open question. Whether at all these modalities can be made so specific that we pick, a particular asana and then it works on a certain problem, or a particular sound or raga and it will work specifically only on this. That not just saying that this is my view. Objectively speaking, if we look at the evidence and consider how the mind and body are structured, we don't really work in such discrete small pieces. Our mood and energy or movement are not really happening in such little slices. So we are functioning as a whole organism, and we can't usually just reach in and just tweak one aspect of our existence alone so easily. That is the challenge that modern medicine itself has run up against. It's not that modern science does not want to help people with the full spectrum of health conditions. Of course, we do. People often look at modern medicine and then they are a little unhappy that you're not seeing a more holistic approach. Look, that isn't really the problem of healthcare professionals. If you ask most doctors, they would really be interested in doing what is best for their patient. There isn't fundamentally a conflict in that sense between modern medicine and any of these holistic approaches for the most part. The question is, how do you do something that actually works with your client, and what is the evidence base, which is not so easy to establish, but it does work a lot of the time. So the problem is, if you look at, for instance, the presentation of the pathway of modern medicine. See, if you look at a model of modern science, it's not that modern science and medicine has only one model. Mostly any model is okay as long as it makes sense. But this happens to be typically the dominant way by which we look at the organization of the human being. We break things down into their constituents. This is often why we tend to be unhappy with the reductionism of modern medicine. And there is some truth behind that, because the dominant model tends to go like this. We tend to break the entire human body and mind down into the constituents. Now, generally, modern medical solutions work very well if we can find the specific knobs to tweak here, and the disease process is directly related to that particular knob, whatever you're going to turn. If you can target a particular molecule somewhere and that is going to fix the health problem, then we can usually find a drug that targets that molecule and it works. Or if the problem is localized to a particular tissue, you can go and do surgery, remove that tissue. Okay, the person is recovering afterwards. After all, modern medicine has made extraordinary strides. Most of us are alive now in such in good health only because of modern medicine providing support. There's no doubt about that. But the problem is, being alive and being without suffering are not the same thing. And there is a little bit of a gap many times, that we are not looking at how to be well. Instead, we are just looking at fixing the pieces many times. This doesn't work so well. This pathway doesn't work so well when the problem is multifactorial, and it is arising as a result of the interaction of many of these pieces, and you can't actually localize the problem anywhere. There is no particular molecular target that's going to work. There's no specific tissue that you can change that's going to make a difference. Now it's difficult to know what to do. That's the challenge. And most chronic health problems tend to fall under that category. If you look at chronic pain, for example, any type of chronic pain, say chronic back pain, most cases of chronic back pain, more than 80% of people with chronic back pain are labeled as non-specific back pain. What does that mean? It means exactly what the title says. We don't really know where to localize the problem. They just have pain, they are not sure why they have pain. More precisely, we do have an idea why they have pain, but we are not able to localize it. We are not able to say this is the reason. What we turn up with is that it's many reasons. It's how they move, it is localized tissue inflammation, it is the psychology about how they think about their back pain, which sensitizes them more to it. It's various sensory motor patterns in the nervous system. There are many tissues involved. See, if you have pain somewhere in your back, it's not because of one tissue typically. Everything is pain sensitive. Muscles are pain sensitive, the ligaments are pain sensitive, the joint capsule is pain sensitive, the lining of the bones is pain sensitive, the tendons are pain sensitive. So once one tissue begins to go a little out of balance, it's never affected in isolation. Instead, what happens is all of these are out of balance. It's like an orchestra, somebody starts playing out of tune, and then everybody is struggling to maintain the tune. It's a bit like that. Dysfunction becomes very quickly very complex. We can't really fix that without also interventions that cover all of these areas. You need to change the way you move, change the way you feel, and each of these involves multiple skills. If you look at movement, for example, it's not about just taking one asana or a couple of asanas for back pain. You have to look at it from a skill-based approach. You have to strengthen the spine, realign it in a neutral posture, stabilize the spine, teach the person to gently move without pain. This kind of skill-based approach is the logical way to go about it. See, the yoga lens has always historically been holistic, because if we go back to the very old ancient Upanishadic presentations, we see that there is this map of the self. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, you have this presentation of the koshas, right? In the other Upanishads, not only in the Taittiriya Upanishad, there is similarly the presentation of a internal to external model. That kind of thinking about who we are has come about from the internal practices of the sages in India, right? We have had so many sages over several thousand years who have explored our mind, body, our self experientially, not by putting instruments on us externally, but through our own internal experience. And you find that presented in the Upanishads, right? This Taittiriya Upanishad has this Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya, etc. And then other Upanishads have these other things, The Kathopanishad, right, has this Yachet Vang Manasi Prajnaha and all that. These are different models of self from outside to inside, and that was systematized historically in the presentation of the map of Sankhya, the tattvas that we see in the presentation of Sankhya is helping us put a structure to this modeling of the holistic self through direct experience. The direct experience comes through meditation practice. For example, if you see the presentation of Sankhya, we can. So, this is the map of the tattvas of Sankhya. That's the same idea that we are exploring our sense of self, but made structured, very systematic. The Sankhya Karika explains each one of these specifically what exactly it is. My point is that if you derive your modeling of the whole person from this approach, it is automatically holistic. Because from this Mahat, the word Mahat actually means great or big, this is the expansive self, the non dual self. I am boundless, I am timeless, that experience. And that in turn becomes the ahankara and the other experiences. I am this, I am that. This pathway of generation of the self and then the mind and your body, then the senses, then the world is an inside to outside pathway which is intrinsically holistic. Therefore, anything happening in the external layers of oneself is automatically a part of all of these layers, and anything happening internally is also a part of all of these layers of self. The yoga modeling, therefore, offers us an intrinsically holistic approach. So we are not trying to only work on the body, or even more specifically, only on some asanas, or only on the breath, or only on the mind. Because the way we understand ourselves is that all these layers of self are intrinsically part of each other. This is a big difference that we must keep in mind whenever we try to make very specific protocols for addressing different conditions, that we don't lose sight of the holistic nature of our existence. Because this is not just a view of whether I want to look at it this way, you want to look at it that way. Some problems are generally better addressed holistically because they are there in many layers of self. Nobody who has chronic pain is suffering only in the body. They are also suffering in the breath, in the senses, and in the mind. Now, it's not that modern medicine does not acknowledge this. Modern medicine does acknowledge this. In fact, if you take any textbook of medicine now, you will see that the first thing we should be doing for many chronic health problems is lifestyle modification. If you have high blood pressure, you have back pain, you have depression, you have to do lifestyle modification. Nobody is arguing with that anymore. The modern science is completely supportive of that. Even in the mainstream textbook, you take Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine, it's very clear that you need to start with lifestyle management for many of these diseases. So no doubt at all on that. The challenge is how to fit it into the system and make sure that there is the skill and the capacity to do that. It's very difficult to do that in the context of a hospital setting when a patient is coming to you and there is so much pressure to see so many patients, etc. Even if the doctor sincerely wants to do that, it is very difficult. And the skill and training required to do that is not exactly what you learn in medical school either. How to breathe, how to move, how to change your thoughts. This is actually spread across bits and pieces in many parts of the modern scientific approach. And not all of it is there. Even if you look at physical therapy and psychology, all of the things that we do in the yoga space, the lenses, the frameworks, and the approaches are not really all there anyway. This is where the value of a more holistic approach becomes inevitable. Once you start considering the holistic approach from a scientific perspective, you see that there is very little reason not to take that holistic view. Because the science is also very clear. When it comes to dealing with chronic health problems, we do need holistic models, and this is where yoga begins to shine. Of course, with the ground of Ayurveda, yoga has always been deeply linked to Ayurveda in the background. See, if you look at the 8 limbs of yoga, on one hand, the 8 limbs of yoga are also echoing what the Upanishads are saying, that there is an internal to external organization. There are more outer layers of self and inner layers of self. But at the same time, it's also a very practical pathway of getting people to do each of these things. The model of yoga is not a atoms to awareness model. It is an internalization model on one hand, but it is also like a landscape. This is why Bhagavan Patanjali uses the name yoga anga, limbs of yoga. It is anga, everything has to be together. If you need to have yoga, you need to have all of the 8 limbs. This is a landscape. You need to work on all of these things. And together, this modeling of yoga is quite extraordinary. If you look at the areas that have been covered in this presentation, it really goes through so many things that we need to do for health and well-being that are so scattered many times in our modern approaches to well-being. So if you look at the modeling of yoga, it is a comprehensive multi-domain modeling, actually, classically. The yamas are talking about behavioral boundaries and ethics, niyamas, different personal disciplines, asana, body, pranayama, breath, pratyahara, senses, samyama, absorption. And there are several other parts in the Yoga Sutra, including cognitive work on the types of cognition, pro-social, positive thoughts like love, joy, compassion, transformation, keys for long-term practice and willpower. So many things are there if you look at the classical presentation of the Yoga Sutra. But we need to, of course, consider how we can bring this into a more practical modern application. That is also true. We have to reorganize it a little bit, reorient it, and make it more possible for people to do that in the modern context. You may not be able to use that modeling exactly in the same way. You need to consider how you can take those models and represent them a little bit in a way that is more comprehensible to people, now not losing the original intent in any way. That is always there for someone who wants to go deeper. But for the average person who's coming in, we need to make it a little more straightforward than that. They can't sit down and study the Yoga Sutra for the headache on their back pain. They have to start with something pretty simple, more straightforward, like this. If you just presented it in simple language, you would land up with something like this. This is actually what we do in the Svastha Yoga therapy training. Of course, we present the entire original Yoga Sutra, all of the things. In fact, all the materials I've been showing you so far are from our Svastha programs, these slides. If you look at our ancient modeling, we actually cover all of these areas. You look at yoga and Ayurveda, which is absolutely amazing. You know how to work with awareness, change your feeling and energy states, emotions and energy, change the cognitive thought processes in your speech with others, various aspects of movement, breathing, lifestyle management, nutrition, so much, so many lenses, models, and ways of looking at it are here, not just in yoga, but in also associated Indian knowledge systems. Once you start looking at relationships, for example, it's not only in yoga, you also need to look at various other supportive areas, including, for example, Indian dramatics. If you look at the presentation of the rasas, initially, Shringara, Veera, Karuna, Hasya, all of those presentations, very interesting if you look at it from the psychological perspective. How is it that you can link it up to self-transformation? Then you need to dig deeper also into the traditional commentaries. I usually tell people this, there is no point in simply taking the Yoga Sutra and reading it. It is just 195 short sentences. You need to read Bhagavan Vyasa's commentary, also authored 1500 years ago. That's where the wisdom is. There is so much spread across the Indian knowledge systems that if we bring it together in a pragmatic and cohesive way, it is a whole life management. Before we fall ill, after we fall ill, if you look at it from the perspective of therapy, but also fundamentally about spirituality and self transformation. At some point, we cannot separate that from well being. So that's my little big picture take, starting off from that idea. It's not a good idea to fragment approaches to therapy too much. You need to keep the big picture in view and then see how the small things we do, movement or breathing, fit in the picture of the whole person.
So what about the doctor himself? There were two instances of two doctors. One was not a medically qualified doctor, but a yoga teacher. One doctor from Mysore said that because of his yoga training, his power of intuition increased many fold, so much so that every day at around 3 o'clock he would get up and he could visualize what is going to happen in the operation. He was a neurosurgeon. He could see what is going to happen at the operation table every early morning. The other yoga practitioner, after the patient went to several allopathy doctors and institutions for continuous hiccups for 10 days, but nothing could be diagnosed or treated. But this yoga teacher and therapist prescribed an allopathy medicine which worked immediately. So, what is that quality of intuition that yoga gives to medical practitioners or yoga therapists? In your experience, does it play a role in as a diagnostic tool?
See, I am a very practical person. I don't go into all these kind of things. First, I don't think anybody should be prescribing allopathic medicines unless they are a qualified doctor in the first place. Whatever the legal situation is, they shouldn't be doing that based on intuition or whatever they think it is. There is value to science and data, and to be very clear, our shastras don't tell us to break those ideas. They don't tell us do things that are at odds with logic and life experience fundamentally. It's important to keep in mind that yoga tradition and a scientific approach are definitely not fundamentally at odds, right? We don't need to, we don't absolutely should not ever make this an us versus them kind of situation. One is superior, other is inferior. I figured out the solution, you don't have the solution. That's really not a good way to approach it. Eventually, who loses? Everybody loses. The patient loses, and the doctors lose. Everybody loses as a result. In fact, I do this slide as part of the starting presentation of my programs. The importance of logic and validation is universal. We also were very clear about this in our traditional studies. We never said that you should just simply ignore these things, right? That's why we had this whole Nyaya Darshana. We need to ensure that we actually check whether the cause-effect relationship is accurate or not. And you know this, right? A very famous Subhashitam, which is actually also there in the Yoga Vasishta. Good saying, right? Yukti yuktamupadeyam vachanam balakadapi anyatra namamivatyajyam api yuktam padmajanmana, right? So it's good to understand that Yoga and Sankhya are actually trying to explain from logic and experience. They are not asking us to blindly believe in something. In fact, you can read the Sankhya Karika if you read the great Vachaspati Mishra's commentary from 1,000 years ago. He really goes back to the roots of the basics of logic and life experience, and he tries to make it very clear to us that he is not just simply telling us to believe in something. He reasons it out. And if you read Adi Shankara's presentations, it is always the Purva Paksha, Uttara Paksha, there is the question and answer. In fact, he raises the questions himself, the Purva Paksha, and answers it, because he is clear that he doesn't want us to be confused and think that what he is saying is not sound. Historically, we have always had all of these, Pratyaksha, Anumana, Agama, all of these areas. If you can be clear from your own direct experience and by logic and so on, that is good. See, if yoga makes you more perceptive, makes you capable of doing whatever you're doing in terms of, say, decision making better, and that is excellent. That is very good. No doubt about that. But that is for each person to find out. Naturally, as our mind grows more calm and clear, you will find yourself being able to see things more clearly. Whatever it is in life or otherwise, we are able to appreciate it more clearly. The mind grows more sharp, our sensitivity grows more clear, we have more stability of our attention. In fact, in the beginning of the Yoga Sutra, in the first sutra, the commentary of the sage Swami Hariharananda Aranya on Vyasa's commentary, he quotes the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata saying that Nasti Sankhya Samam Jnanam, Nasti Yoga Samam Balam. Right? There is no jnana, there is no knowledge like Sankhya, because Sankhya tells us how to really know the true nature of everything, ourselves included. And there is no strength like yoga, because yoga is about samadhi, the capacity to hold our attention steady. That is classical yoga. And nothing really can be achieved in this life without that capacity to hold the mind steady, nor can we achieve anything spiritually in whatever afterlife we think there is. Whatever good intention we have, whether it is studying or whether it is understanding medicine or seeing a patient, or it is succeeding in a business deal, or it is the other way around, right? We want to actually step away from these things, nivritti marga or pravritti marga, whichever direction we wish to go, unless we have samadhi bala, the capacity to hold our attention steady, we are not going to succeed. This is where yoga shines, whether one is a surgeon or a therapist, or one is a musician, or one is a sports person, or we are doing something else ordinary in our lives, or leave alone profession, personal relationships, right? We think that I should be more kind, I should speak more nicely to my wife or daughter or parents, and then but we get angry. Why? Because we are not able to stabilize the mind. Our intentions don't come to fruition. People make New Year resolutions, they are not able to stick to it. Again, why? Because samadhi bala, the capacity to hold our attention stable, is not there. So yoga can enhance many things, our capacity to perceive things more clearly, succeed more effectively, no doubt about that. But we should use it wisely in the way that is doing good for us and good for others.
Such a lovely conversation. Thank you so much, Doctor. Just as a last concluding remarks, could you tell our listeners about what you will be speaking about at the Utsava, and why is it important to have such festivals of celebration of yoga?
See, yoga is fundamentally grounded in this extraordinary history of several thousand years in India, from our roots here. But we are in a modern time now. We need to make sure that whatever we are doing is relevant in the modern context, make it possible for us to take that wisdom and apply it effectively. Now, that is our responsibility. My presentation in the conference is could be on so many things, but I'm choosing to focus principally on this, a holistic approach to well-being. These domains, skills, a pragmatic approach to understand yourself, and how do you go from past to present. How do you actually use yoga in a practical way for well-being, looking at various domains and skills, awareness, breathing, movement. How do you apply it effectively to yourself? See, a conference is a way to get exposure and to meet other people. It is a way to get a taste of the subject typically, and then students can dive deeper into it based on their interests, their accessibility, etc. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. See, because yoga is so widespread in the world everywhere, it's also important not to lose sight of its grounding in our history, the culture, and the tradition here. That is where this conference, like the Mysuru Yoga Utsava, plays a really important role, right? That every year there is a space where this is highlighted, that this grounding in the traditional aspects of yoga is highlighted and it is placed on stage visibly, so people also keep an eye on that as they go here and there and they learn yoga in so many other places, that we don't lose the touch, the connection with how yoga has been so deeply present in India for such a long time. It has seen its ups and downs. It's not that yoga was very popular when I was growing up. Even if you go back 35, 40 years ago, yoga was actually less popular than even in India at that time. Everybody of my age group knows that. My parents, when they studied with Sri Krishnamacharya, my father met Sri Krishnamacharya in 1971, and he started studying with him in that same year. That was a long time ago, more than 50 years, and they are still very much around. My parents, they are still together and they're still practicing every day.
Look.
That was a very different era. People were not really so clear what yoga was about. Sri Krishnamacharya himself tried to propagate yoga further back in the 1920s. It was a different time. Now I'm very happy that yoga is so popular. People are really looking to yoga for the health benefits, for spiritual transformation. But Sri Krishnamacharya always used to say also that we should not distort the Shastras, right? Whatever is true and meaningful in the ancient studies, it's not that everything that is said in ancient times is necessarily sound. You know that. Just because something was said in the past doesn't make it sound. But there is a lot that is said in the yoga space and many of the related Indian knowledge systems that is sound. That is absolutely as relevant now as it was before. And it also gives us lenses and ways to understand ourselves that we are really missing nowadays with the kind of fragmentation and the way life is going on now. That, I think, is the real value of coming to a conference like this, that you really have the chance to revisit how yoga is grounded in the entire history of India and how it has come from there. Because it has truly been that way, all the way from north to south. If you have Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and all of this, and you have Hatha Yoga Pradipika in Sanskrit, you also have Tirumalar and Tirumandiram in Tamil Nadu here in India, which talks about all these ancient things, everything from Kundalini to Hatha Yoga practices to the 8 limbs of yoga is there in the Tirumular's work. So it has really been there everywhere in India as the background. So that is, I think, a wonderful thing to bring to the stage and make sure that people don't lose touch with. So that is a very good reason to attend the Mysore Yoga Utsava. So I hope it goes very successfully and a lot of people find the intention and motivation to engage with this.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to speak to you and get this extreme 360 degrees perspective of well-being.
Thank you so much. I
Namaste.
look
And looking
forward
forward
Thank you.
to seeing you in Mysore.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.